Right about now, you are listening to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, a show where we discuss living as a leader worth following, leading others to do the same, and in doing so, leaving a legacy for future generations. My name is Jimmy Gonzalez Jr., a learning and development professional and leadership coach, sitting down with my co-host Anthony Devon Watts Jr., an expert contact center leader that has effectively led and developed dynamic teams with high motivation. Together, we have over 30 years experience in the corporate game. Join us as we discuss our growth as leaders, share the lessons we've learned, and interview others to see how their leadership style was shaped as they were mentored by adversity. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jimmy Gonzalez Jr., your co-host of Legacy in Leadership, along with the infamous Anthony Devon Watts Jr., a.k.a. leadership docent, a.k.a. my little homie, a.k.a. forever Trey Deuce. If you don't know, maybe one day we'll talk about that. But yeah, man, how you doing? What's good?
I'm doing well, man. A little tired, but still re-energized, as weird as that may sound. For those who listened to our last episode, we talked a lot about sharpening our saw, and so I got the opportunity to work on my physical, my mental, my emotional, my spiritual sharpness this past weekend. The missus and myself, got away with a couple of friends. We went to Tarpon Springs here in Florida, which is like north of Tampa, and rented out a little home there and got to spend some time kayaking. And so for me, it's just super dope anytime I get an opportunity to kind of reconvene with nature. And we ended up doing like 5 miles, like 2.5 out and 2.5 back. And got to swim with some manatees, which was pretty dope. We saw 4 manatees.
Nice.
Like one was like larger than the kayak itself, so we were definitely all terrified that it was going to flip us over. And then we also ended up swimming inadvertently with some water moccasin. And so everybody was appropriately freaked out. But yeah, man, it was just a good time overall, man. Just to get out in nature, enjoy the water, enjoy, just like hanging out with friends and stuff like that. Man, we had a blast all the way around. So I'm good, man.
And
What about
celebrating also.
you? Yeah, celebrating.
Got to say happy birthday.
Thank you.
In your ripe old age of 32 now.
Yes, sir. Yep, celebrating 32 years of life.
Look at him.
Yeah, man. I'm just blessed, man. Excited, man. Like 32 years of life and love, and I even shared with folks, leadership. If you consider the fact my dad had me in training since diapers, and it's just awesome, man. It's a blessing, man. It's a blessing to see 32 and where we're currently at in life, and just I got a chance to, with taking the time off, be able to kind of appreciate those things, man. So it's awesome.
Good, man. Good. Happy to hear that.
Awesome.
So yeah.
What about you?
No, I'm doing well. It's, you got to practice what you preach, right? So it's interesting that you said that. On the last episode, I mentioned that the time had got changed up with the gym that I was going to with my friend, and I was going to stop that. But then I realized, I think he's going like at 5:30, and I'm like, you know what? That's really not that early. I've been to the gym that early before. Like, just make it happen. So I started doing that again, this week, and we talked about the meditation piece and that mental, aspect, and how that was a discipline that I had gotten away from. So added that back this week, and yeah, just focusing on my intermittent fasting. So a few things that I got back into this week, again, practicing what I preach, and, leading by example, right? That's something that we definitely talk about. That's important as a leader. And while nobody knows those things, I mean, I'm talking about it now, but it's important for me, and it's been a good week. All of those things, focusing on my quiet time, like all of those things this week have just been much more positive, for my mental state. And I've had a couple of long nights, the last 2 nights as well. So I feel you. This night is going to be probably the same, but it's all good. So Yeah.
Well, you mentioned too that people don't know these things, but it's still important to practice what you preach, and I think that's also a valuable lesson too. Just as a leader, it's really about what you do when nobody's looking, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about the discipline and the accountability, really lives with yourself, and so none of our legacy leaders are watching a live feed of us actually sharpening our saw or anything like that, but just with yourself, you hold yourself to that standard of, well, look, if I'm talking about these things and I'm stressing the importance, I need to make sure I practice these things as well. And so I commend you on that, man.
Oh, appreciate it. So you were celebrating this past weekend for a couple of days. Did you have some days off this week?
Yeah, I took off. So I took off Monday. So actually, I took off last Friday, and then I took off Monday so that we would have time to kind of travel down, or actually travel up to Orlando, drop off Man with the grandparents. Just here y'all go, and then head over to our trip. And then I knew coming back we would just need some time to kind of adjust. And because the missus and our birthdays are literally 7 days apart, typically for her birthday we do an adults type event, and then for my birthday, because the kids aren't with us, I try to do something with the kids. And so I took off that Monday so that we could focus on doing some stuff with the kids, and then came back to work on Tuesday. And so I can tell you that some of these long nights have fortunately been working on projects and initiatives outside of just kind of the normal scope of work. And it's not because I'm having to play catch up or cover down, my team from all the things that they miss. They actually, do a phenomenal job of staying on top of those things. And I would say I attribute a part of that just to, kind of the culture that I've always tried to cultivate, a culture of empowerment. And, just making sure that they have the autonomy to handle a lot of these things in my absence, so that I'm not stopping the progress of the business, and I give them an opportunity to kind of stretch themselves. I really want to ensure that the kind of the future talent of our organization, the person that's going to fill my shoes when I move on to something else, is coming from my down chain. And the only way to do that is to get them exposure in a safe way, right? Like we've always kind of talked about leadership and what development is about, being able to do it in a safe way where they get the opportunity, they're protected through that process, they get to learn, and that if they make any mistakes along the way, you're there to cover them down and make sure that they understand the lesson and the mistake.
Yeah. That's a good word, empowerment. Definitely want to give a shout out to Leslie. I want to kill the name. I believe it's Miserak is how you pronounce the last name. I had a chance to be on her podcast a couple of weeks ago. Her podcast is the Empowerful Leader. And I had an opportunity to discuss that, but I like that word, and I think it's something that we can definitely dive into today when you talk about truly. And that was some of the things that she, some of the questions and things that she asked me about is like, how do you truly empower your team as a leader? So I know there's some concepts that you and I have learned over the years, and I have worked to really not just have them, head knowledge, but making sure that these are things that we truly live and try to employ, every opportunity that we have with our team. So you just mentioned, how you have been working with your team and really establishing yourself and establishing some of these things, within your first 90 days or so. So the four P's that help to empower a team, help to empower a person. I definitely wanted to talk about that and, really ask you some questions and kind of dig into your thoughts on providing, in order to provide empowerment, providing permission, parameters, protection, and then within that, having patience with an individual that you're developing, having patience with your team through that process as well.
Yeah, actually, it's crazy, man, because you're right. I forgot that you actually appeared on Leslie's show to talk just about empowerment. And that was actually a good episode. If you guys have not checked it out, I think we plugged it just a little bit, but we can always refresh it and plug you guys back to that episode, so you know get a little bit more feel for Jimmy's thoughts, you know, from an empowerment perspective. But I'm sure some of those things will come to light in our discussion today. But it's I think it is appropriate to really unpack that, because I would say one of the skills that I often find leaders you know struggle with the most is around empowerment and how to do it properly. For a couple of reasons. One, I think, you know, for a lot of us as leaders, part of the reason why we've gotten to the position that we've gotten to is because we've shown time and time again that we have a high capacity to be able to execute at a high level. And so we've already created this reputation for ourselves that, hey, if you give me more, I can produce high quality product, I can take it on and still maintain all the other things that I'm responsible for, especially when you're like an entry level leader. Then as you continue to grow, and somebody says, okay, you've proven that you're a really good entry level leader. We want you to develop leaders. We want you to lead leaders, or we want you to lead leaders who lead leaders, or we want you to lead leaders that lead leaders that lead leaders, right? As you continue to go through that ladder and that scope, what you really start to find out is that no matter how high functioning you are from an ability to execute perspective, the thing that is going to be the greatest differentiator in your ability to accelerate time, influence results, you know, impact change is how well you are at delegating or empowering within your team to get things done. There has to be a high level of trust, you know, in those levels, in those roles, in order to go through this process. And so a lot of times leaders end up stymieing their own growth in their careers because they don't take the time to develop that skill. And at the end of the day, I'm not looking for, especially in some of those higher leadership roles, you know, whether you're, you know, senior level management, you know, director, executive leadership, I'm not looking for somebody that can do it all. I'm not looking for somebody that can do it all and be an individual contributor. I'm looking for somebody that can develop it all. Develop all of those skill sets, those competencies within their down chain, so that the business has strength, foundational strength across the board. And so, yeah, man, it does make a lot of sense for us to really kind of unpack that. Funny enough, I know you recall I had the opportunity to speak at Orange County Jail, to kind of facilitate their leadership retreat. And one of the concepts, funny enough, and these are people who are in public sector leadership, right? So at the highest levels of public sector leadership, and I think 33rd is actually like the third largest correctional facility in the entire state of Florida. It was the concept around empowerment that they struggled with the most. Because again, you know, as leaders, we want things done a certain way, and we want to have confidence in the results, right? Confidence in the results. And so a lot of times we think the way to do that is for me to own it and not let somebody else get in the mix here, right? Especially if it's high, highly sensitive deliverable. And so as we were kind of breaking down those concepts, it was really dope to see the light bulbs go off for them. And so hopefully as we go through this process, some of our legacy leaders that are listening will have, a similar response to some of these concepts. And if you're already familiar with them, and this is just it serves as a really good reminder, then we've done our job. And if you've never heard this before, we're trying to pass it on to you because Jimmy and myself both at one point in our career had to learn this lesson the hard way by not doing it properly and not doing it enough, and then realizing that we were limiting our effectiveness as leaders.
Yeah, you limit your effectiveness and you just overwork yourself. Like if you don't have trust in your people and in your team to allow them to handle a lot of the work, then again, you end up doing it all of yourself, and it takes a lot out of you. And there was something else important that you kind of glossed over. Every good leader, you mentioned, is developing their people, but also you're developing one or two that have shown interest, that have expressed interest, or that you see, even if maybe they don't realize it themselves. But like, how do I find somebody to replace me? And yeah, maybe it's because you're looking yourself, to get to that next level. or regardless, you just know anything can change, and it's about succession planning, and that's always important within an organization to make sure that you have a strong succession plan. And focusing on these 4 Ps helps you to develop those people around you that are looking to hopefully have your position one day, so that you can go off and do something else, so that maybe you can continue to move up as well. So yeah, being able to really help provide that empowerment through permission, through protection, through parameters, and then the patience that goes along with some of the learning curves and growing pains that you have. All of those things help to, again, empower somebody to continue to develop themselves, to help them get to that next level.
Absolutely.
And I'll say, even with you, man, like earlier on in our relationship, that was something that I tried to do, right, and pour out into you. And you never necessarily took my spot because it never came available, but you moved on, right? I was a sales manager at the time, and you moved on and became a sales manager in another space. So it's not always necessarily about, helping somebody to take your role. I think that's always important. Sometimes we get so focused on the next level, but we've heard it plenty of times. Okay, yeah, we can work on that, but who's going to take your spot? Especially when you're a high performer and you're doing a really good job, who's going to take your spot to backfill and be that next man, that next woman, to step up and be in there. So, so I'm excited about getting into this conversation and really, again, breaking down those 4 points. So kind of cool. We did 4 points last week. I'm going to do 4 points this week too.
Hey.
Yeah. So let's start off with permission. Why is it? First, talk about permission. What do we mean by that in empowering an employee, empowering a team member, or just overall empowering your team? And why is that important?
So for me, permission is important. It's the first step, because I think for a lot of the leaders that you work with, who have a desire to do more, to take on more, they first need to know that they have your support. They have your endorsement, right? And I think a lot of times, absent of that permission, you will have, because I've just seen it myself, you'll have leaders that they don't go all the way because they're concerned about boundaries. They're concerned about hierarchy and boundaries, and it's not my responsibility. I'm not trying to step on your toes. And even if they have the capacity to do the task at hand, or to go that extra step, or to go that extra mile, naturally, they want to make sure that they're still operating within certain parameters, which I know we'll get to. So it's important as a leader, first and foremost, if you're trying to cultivate a culture of empowerment, that your people understand that they have permission to execute on your behalf without you micromanaging, or them having to check in with you in whatever area you're trying to empower them in, right? Whether that is around accountability, whether it's around reporting out on results, not just for maybe their team, but for the network as a whole. Maybe it's project management. I think that's an area for sure that permission is critically important as you continue to empower individuals to represent you or represent the business on various initiatives where you don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to be able to step in and represent the organization. They need to understand that they have their permission to act with some autonomy based off of the other components and empowerment that you're going to give them through that process. So permission is critically important. I think that's really where it starts first and foremost, because it sets the table for the discussion around the other P's that we'll be getting to in the rest of the session today.
Yeah, so what it boils down to with those things that you just mentioned is ownership. You're allowing them to take on additional responsibilities, and in doing so, they feel ownership in the process. They feel ownership for the results, and when you allow people to get into that space and to feel that ownership, hopefully, you're going to get a higher level of effort and production from them, because, again, they're owning it and they have that responsibility that they feel. So yeah, it's important to give them, again, the sense that they have the permission to take on these additional responsibilities, You mentioned project management. You mentioned covering and reporting out on results, but also the permission to make mistakes.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on because you said ownership, and I think that's the best way to just kind of sum it up. To be honest with you, and I would take it a step further too to say not only does the permission allow ownership around the process and the results. Um, I would also say it's a good leveling process for you as a leader delegating out the work
Mm-hmm.
to understand that I am actually transitioning ownership of this to somebody else. Like I'm wiping my hands of it to some extent, right? Like I'm not going to be in the minutia, I'm not going to be in the weeds. And I think that's important, especially when you talk about some of the benefits of empowerment. As a leader and for your organization, is by uh, by allowing some of these younger leaders or newer leaders in your organization to own some of these initiatives, you also create an environment where you're starting to get a different diversity and perspective on how to solution.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important. One of the things that I see a lot of companies struggle with, to be honest with you, is that they keep going back to kind of tired solutions. Like when they see different problems, right? Well, what did we do back in 2008? What did we do back in 2000? What did we do back in 99? And so because there's no diversity in thought, you don't get these different perspectives that may be rooted in different experiences than the current leadership team, right? And I think that's important because it reminds me of I know you've heard this before. You ever heard the story about the ham in a pan?
Yes.
Right. So like the ham in the pan story. So for those who haven't heard it, it's one of the things that I've always held on to as the importance of getting diverse thoughts and diverse perspectives on things. And I'll try and keep it short and sweet as much as I can with me running my mouth, right? But essentially, a man and his wife are preparing Christmas dinner for the family, and the wife is working on the ham. Right, everybody loves a ham. I cooked a ham for Thanksgiving. It came out really, really good. I'm probably gonna run that back. So she's working on the ham, and as she's working on the ham, the husband, just like most spouses in the kitchen, they're sideline cooking, and they're like, "Hey," he's like, "Yeah, the ham, but like, it looks good, but you're doing it wrong. Like, you gotta cut off the end of the ham. You gotta put it in a pan, and you gotta put that in the oven too, right?" And she's like, the wife is like, why? Like, why do I have to do that? And he's like, well, because that's how my mom made it. Like, I've seen my mom make this plenty of times. She's coming to dinner, her and my grandma. Like, I want to make sure it's perfect. So, like, you got to follow this process. This is the recipe. You got to cut off the end of the ham. You got to put it in a pan, and you got to throw that in the oven too after you cook it, right? And she's like, I don't get that. Like, why? Like, I'm gonna ask your mom. I'm gonna ask your mom like the process. Like, why should I do it that way? Like, what's the benefit? So mom finally comes. They get an opportunity to talk to the mom, and he's like, "Hey, mom, tell her like she's doing the ham wrong. She's supposed to cut off the end and put it in the pan." She's like, "Yeah, absolutely. That's how you do it. You got to cut off the end. You got to put it in the pan. You got to cook it that way. Otherwise, you're not gonna have a good ham. You're just not. That's not." And so again, the wife is still just kind of struggling with it. And she's like, "Okay, I hear you, but like, what's the benefit?" Right. And so the mom was like, well, that's how my mom made it, and that's how I made it, and so that's the process. That's how you do it. That's the recipe. It's a family recipe. All right. And so the wife's like, all right, well, let me talk to Nana. Like, when she gets here, I'm going to talk to Nana, and I'm going to see what her perspective is. So when grandma finally comes, they ask her, hey, the ham, like, she's doing it wrong. She's supposed to cut off the end and put it in the pan, right? And the grandma was like, well, she's like, that's how I used to do it, but that's because our oven was too small. So I couldn't fit the whole ham in the oven. So I had to cut off the end and put it in the pan just to be able to cook it. Y'all got this super fancy oven. Y'all don't need to cut off the end. Just go ahead and throw that thing in there. Right? And so I think too often as leaders, if we don't have that diverse perspective, or we're not allowing newer leaders with different experiences and different diverse thoughts to own initiatives for the organization, we end up in this kind of cyclical approach to problem solving where we're doing things because that's how we've always done it, right? It's the ham in the pan thought process. And so, added benefit of this empowerment process and allowing your team to own it is you get those diverse perspectives, and even you as a leader, you get to learn through that process, because there may be things that they're bringing to the table when you allow them to have full ownership that you're like, well, damn, I didn't think about I wouldn't have approached solving this issue that way, because I don't have that experience to pull from, but I can see the value, and I've added something to my arsenal. And my leader that I'm working to develop and empower, not only feels the ownership, but is better for it in that process because they've gotten that win under their belt. So, I sorry to cut you off, but like when you just said ownership, it was like bouncing around in my head over and over again. I'm like, yeah, man, he's absolutely right. That's like the best way to just kind of like tie it all up in terms of the importance of permission. It really does come down to the ownership, them owning it, and then you owning it as a leader that I'm letting them own it. Because I think for us as leaders, we have to come to grips with that. Like if you're really empowering them, like fam, really empower them. That means provide support, don't micromanage, and don't go in with the expectation that they're just going to do it how you would do it. Give them the autonomy to do it how they want to do it, and be there as a support along the way to teach them the lessons when they have pitfalls.
Yeah, we've talked about creativity being another kind of cornerstone, right, of a leader, but it's giving them permission to be creative, and their creative thoughts and ideas may be different than yours. And that has to be okay. And how do you take those and then maybe even build upon those as a team and as a group to really flesh out that idea and that thought? But giving people permission to be creative is empowering, right? So,
well said.
So parameters. We talked about permission. What do we mean by parameters? How do we empower our team by providing parameters? Because we just talked about giving them creativity, giving the permission, but now we're using that word parameters.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're closing in just a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say that. It's like almost like, oh man, you're trying to stifle my creativity.
Exactly.
You're trying to give me parameters. But I think to your point, it's not that as much as it is you're giving them clarity in kind of their how much ownership they have, right? And that in itself is empowering, right? So it's funny because like I think back to I'm 2 years older than my sister. I'm the oldest, so everybody knows what comes with that. If you're the oldest, and if you're not the oldest, you're probably a hater because you had to deal with the oldest. But when I think back to like I finally hit that age where my parents were like, all right, we gonna step out, and TJ, you're in charge of Mary. Like y'all got this, right? If you need anything, you call, right? And I believe the first time that they did that, right, all I heard was you're in charge, and there wasn't really any parameters. And so you can imagine the level of ownership I took. Like, not only am I responsible for choosing what we eat, but I think I'm getting tired of you trying to hog the TV. You're punished. Mama and Daddy said I'm in charge. I'm just like Mama and Daddy now. I'm in charge. That's the level of ownership I have. I'm empowered now. I'm the adult, right? Now, mind you, I was probably all of like maybe 14, 15 or something like that. Like I had no business trying to ground my sister or call any shots or anything like that. You know what I mean? But I think that's a pitfall of not having clearly defined parameters, right? When you have a leader who you've given them the permission, you give them the ownership, but you haven't clearly defined the boundaries in which they can operate, you run the risk of one or two things. One, having an overzealous leader who now, because I've been told I'm in charge of this, right? They take full ownership and they're starting to maybe overextend their boundaries in terms of the autonomy they have in the decisions that they're making. And then now you have to go back and you have to, rein them in, reset expectations. You got to teach them the lesson in that process, and you inadvertently end up stifling, to be honest with you, their development and their empowerment, because they remember that first time that they were fully in charge, they got their hand slapped because they were doing too much, right? Yeah. And so now they're kind of tiptoeing. So you got that situation, or you got the opposite where you have maybe a leader who, and I think you touched on this, you are being intentional about investing in, and maybe they don't see the skill set in themselves just yet, but you see it. You had the eye for it. You're like, look, All you need is development. You need to build your confidence. You need to get some wins under your belt, and then that will catapult you to where you need to be in your career in the next step. Those leaders typically are, gun shy, for a lack of a better word, right? And so without clearly defined parameters, you tell them they're in charge, but they're not going to actually take any ownership or initiative because they don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to let you down. They don't want to do a disservice, right? So you have either the leader who is like a bull in a china shop and, hey, I'm in charge, I'm breaking everything, and then you got to tell me, hey, I did too much. Or you have the leader that is very pensive. It reminds me of the pensive parrot, very pensive.
Parakeet,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, very pensive, and so they don't take any initiative. And a lot of times the fault is because you didn't provide the parameters, the clarity, so that they understood where they can operate within. From a ownership perspective.
So as a parent, it's you learn that even though your children may act like they don't want the boundaries and those parameters, really as youth, we do appreciate that. Like we want to know that, yeah, I'm trying to grow into my own person and become a young adult and those type of things, but I still appreciate having boundaries. Not that our employees are children, definitely not what I'm saying. As just human beings, as individuals, we still appreciate boundaries and expectations. Right. So you're giving me permission, you're giving me ownership. But when I have clear expectations of what it is that you're asking me to do, then I have even that much more ownership because now I know what the scoreboard is. Right. I know exactly the target that I need to hit in order to complete this task, to complete this mission, and to achieve whatever goal that we're trying to achieve. And in the end, that provides more empowerment because I know that I have permission. You trust me, but I also have these clear expectations and boundaries to work within to ensure that I'm truly have the best opportunity to hit the mark.
Mm-hmm. No, well said. Well said. And yeah, to your point, is not to say again that our leaders are children by any stretch of the imagination, but kind of going back to something we mentioned in a prior episode. Shout out to us. We're getting enough episodes under our belt where I can't necessarily recall what episode we said this in.
So really quick, we didn't mention it, but this is episode 7. That was the 00, the James Bond.
007.
The James Bond episode, yes.
But kind of going back to something we said in a prior episodes around the mindset, around leadership, developing and equating it to the level of care, patience, understanding you have for your child or for a child, whether they are your kid or they are just a kid. Because again, you don't necessarily have to be a parent in order to have that level of empathy and understanding. The same is true in this situation, right? It's if okay, for a child, I have to be very clear about my expectations, about boundaries, about what's allowed, what's not allowed, all of those things, because that structure gives them security to then be able to focus on maximum effort and maximum output within those boundaries, right? It's like when you move with a different level of speed. Like I'm thinking about driving or like riding a bicycle. You move with a different level of speed when you can see the guardrails versus going up a mountain, because again, this is a climb for folks, versus going up a mountain where there's no guardrails and you don't necessarily know where does the road end and the drop begin, right? So those guardrails are important to give them the necessary security so that they can just focus on maximum effort, right, and maximum output, and they're not having to second guess every move that they make to say, all right, am I going too far? Am I going too far? What about now? Am I going too far? And so that's where those boundaries are critically important. Those parameters are critically important to the empowerment recipe, if you want to call it that. Those have to be clearly defined.
That is what we're going to call it, the empowerment recipe.
Yes, nice.
You need a little bit of permission, little parameters, little protection, and a little dash of patience. Actually, a whole bunch of patience. Not just a dash.
Yeah, man. Especially for I'm just thinking about us specifically for people like ourselves. You know, leadership and just kind of wisdom and time. I know for both of us have softened us in the sense that we know now that we know nothing. We know even more now that we know nothing as leaders, and we operate with just a different level of patience. Still urgency at times where necessary, but just a different level of patience, understanding, and empathy for those that we've been entrusted to lead. Because again, we just have the benefit of just time and our experiences. So yeah, not just a dash of patience, like a whole jar and a half of patience is going to be necessary when you go through this process.
Yeah. You mentioned the word protection. So that's the third ingredient is protections for our legacy leaders listening. Again, we're breaking down, the recipe for true empowerment. So it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake. As teachers, as learners, some of the best lessons in life, right, is learning from your mistakes. And you say that, I never take a loss. I never take a loss because as long as I'm learning from that situation, then I'm always on the come up. It's always a positive thing for me. So it's important for us as leaders to make sure that our team understands that they have that protection in the sense that it's okay to make a mistake. And if you do make a mistake, let's talk about it. Let's go back and think about the scenario, think about what happened, what led to that potential, or not the potential, but what led to that mistake, and potentially what could we have done differently? What can we learn from that situation so that we don't make the same mistake again, right? That's always one of the key goals is, I might make a mistake, but I pride myself on the fact that I'll never make the same mistake twice. Well, if you never really go back and learn from that last mistake, then you're going to be doomed, right, to continue to keep banging your head on the wall and making those same mistakes.
No, absolutely. It's funny too, because I think, for me, the protection, when I learned these concepts, the protection one was the first one that really resonated with me. And it was largely because I've had experiences in the past where there was a lack of protection. And I remember how vulnerable it felt as a leader going through that process. When somebody has positioned it as, hey, I'm going to put you in a position to get exposure. I'm going to put you in this position to get opportunity. You're going to be able to grow, right? I got this really awesome initiative. You're going to be the person to own it. You're going to see it all the way through. This is going to be great for you, right? You're going to represent me, right? And you go in with kind of that mindset, especially if you're hungry for growth, like, yeah, man, this is my shot. This is it. They're putting me in the game. I'm going to be able to show some things, build some relationships, right? And they're giving you the permission. They're giving you the parameters. Hey, these are this is kind of what we're trying to accomplish, and you have the autonomy to make these decisions without even involving me. I trust you. I trust where you're going to take this. And then through that process, you run into a situation where maybe a decision that you make is challenged by another stakeholder. And when somebody asks questions or like, why was that decision made? How do we get there? Right. And you're expecting that the person that empowered you to step in and be like, hey, actually, I'll own that. And they don't do that. And they're on the other side of the table like, yeah, how did that thing happen? Who told you could make those decisions? Right. And you're like, bro, but it was you. You told me to make, right. Now, obviously, it's not value added to express that, especially in that audience, right? Maybe you have that discussion, one-on-one and you manage up, but just, I recall like what it felt like in that moment of that lack of protection, that exposure, that vulnerability, and some of the I would call it legitimate fears because it was rooted in obviously what I felt like was legitimate, but obviously with hindsight, I would say that they're a little bit irrational, but in the moment they were definitely legitimate. But you have that fear of, well, damn, what does this mean for my career? What did I just do? Did I ruin my chance of the next promotional opportunity because I left a less than favorable impression on a key stakeholder for the business that may have some input on who's the next person to take that next step, and does this make people question my work product and my ability? Did I erode some trust? Did I erode some faith? Right? You have all of those things that go through your mind because you feel completely exposed, right? And you didn't have the protection. You didn't have somebody to cover you down and step in and say, actually, you know what? I was the one who, told Devon, he could make that decision within these parameters. If we need to sync up and do something different, then we can level set, right? Like that conversation wasn't had. And so because of those experiences for me, I really do. I try to over-index when it comes to the protection component, from an empowerment perspective. Again, making sure that I'm there to provide cover for my leaders, in case the decision that they made doesn't necessarily pan out or align with the direction that we want to go in, or there's some resistance to it. And then, again, using that as an opportunity to then go back and teach, right, and find the lesson in the opportunity. Like you said, we don't take a L, right, or we don't take a loss. We take a L. It's a lesson, right? It's not a loss, right? So to focus on the lesson and not paint it as a loss because you didn't lose anything, right? There's just a lesson we got to learn here. And so I'll use that as an opportunity to go back and let's just kind of focus on the lesson, and then make sure that they still, their confidence is not shook in that process, right? And so protection to me is critically important in this entire recipe. Like if you do the other components, you give the permission and you give the parameters, but you don't get the protection right, you don't provide the protection, that can almost be more damaging than coming up short in the permission or the parameters component, right? Because I think with the permission and the parameters, that's a little bit more one-on-one focused, right? We can close the gap there, right? If there's you're not clear about your parameters, if you're not clear that you have the permission to act, I can close that gap with you and do so in the safety of our mentorship relationship and not expose you or have you leave a less than favorable impression on some of the other stakeholders. Whereas if I miss on the protection, that could be damaging. It could be damaging to the trust that you have with me. It could be damaging to, again, just the impression you leave on some other stakeholders. And it's hard to close that gap after it's already happened. I can tell you in that experience, like, after I'd already felt like I was exposed, right, my butt in the wind, for a lack of a better phrase, there was nothing that individual could say that made me feel like, especially moving forward, if they allowed me to own something, and that they were going to have my back. You can't come up short there.
Yeah, it destroys the trust, and depending on that person's personality, they can get gun shy. Now they don't want to push harder. They don't want to take risk, calculated risk. They don't want to be creative. All the things that we've been talking about that allows somebody to thrive. Now they're holding back because, again, they know that they don't have that protection from their leader. And as a leader, it's always important. They always say kind of the crap rolls downhill, right? To a certain extent it does. But as a leader, you're there to protect your people. So, when the bombs are going off, right, and the shrapnel is kind of flying around, you're supposed to be there to take that for your people, to take that for your squad. And they don't always see that. But when they do, again, it just continues to build that trust because they realize, man, I can really depend on this person. And even if it was my fault, they're going to say it was their fault, because they're the leader and ultimately they're responsible. You know what I mean? So, it's that difference between kind of responsibility and ownership, right? Like, yeah, I was responsible to perform or to get this done in a particular way because it was my task, but ultimately myself, my leader, and this team, like, we all have ownership of whatever that goal was. You know what I mean? And the fact that we missed the mark. So
exactly.
Yeah. So we've dived into three: permission, parameters, and protection. We talked about being centered. We talked about kind of the last week the spiritual component, and just making sure that you're centered so that you have grace to provide grace. But I mentioned patience is a virtue. It's important to have patience, and just to let your people know that you're there to ride with them. Like, you're there to go through the bumps, the bruises, again, the growing pains. One, because you realize you were there yourself, at some point in your career and in your development. And hopefully, I think for both of us, definitely, we were blessed to have people in our lives that were cognizant of that and intentional and wanting to go through that with us, because they saw the potential, they saw what we can do then, and even possibly what we could become in the future. So it's important that your people know that you're willing to go through that ride with them, and take that journey through their development process, and have patience along the way.
Absolutely. Actually, it's funny because I tell leaders quite often, like when we're working on this skill set, because again, I feel like it's for leaders that are looking to take that step and be in a position where they're leading leaders. This is typically the last skill that they actually develop, right? Develop the empowerment or the delegation, however you want to put it. Even if you're delegating, if you're doing it effectively, you're doing it properly, you're following this recipe because you're empowering folks in order to do so. Mm-hmm. And I tell them, like, there's this misconception that delegating or empowering others to own something is the easy thing to do. And in reality, especially going back to the leaders that have created a reputation of being able to have high capacity for work product and churn out high quality results in the process, the easy thing to do is to do it yourself, right? Because I know if I own it and I do it once, it's going to be done right. It's going to look exactly how I want it to look. There's no feedback, no coaching, no none of that, right? The empowerment process and the delegation process is really the most taxing as a leader to do, because that this is not going to be in all likelihood, it's not going to be I give you permission, I give you parameters, I give you protection, you go and do it, and you give me exactly what I was looking for. This is your first time ever doing it, and you're a savant, and guess what? This is flawless. Oh my God, I'm the best manager ever. I developed you. That's not what happens at all. Actually what happens is there's growing pains in that process. There's check-ins throughout that experience. You're providing feedback, you're refining, you're saying, hey, have you considered this? That's not exactly what I'm looking for. Have you considered this? Can you try doing it this way? Then you find out that in order to execute on this process, they also have to develop maybe another skill in order to see it to fruition. And so there's that constant feedback cycle that you have to go through as a leader when you're empowering your folks, that you're going to need a whole heap of patience to be able to get through it. Mm-hmm. And again, I think to your point, it's about drawing back on the experiences that you've had, because at one point, like, you didn't know how to do this. Mm-hmm. Like, bro, you didn't know how to do this. You didn't walk into your organization or your role with the competency to say, oh yeah, I've gotten this down pat. The very first time I've seen it, I was able to build a spreadsheet and pivot table and create a dashboard and do an analysis and or manage a project to completion with no hiccups and no missed deadlines and everybody turning in their work product. Like, no, you took your bumps along the way. You made your mistakes along the way. And fortunately, I think for most of us, you had somebody that was in your corner that had the patience to help coach you through those shortcomings and those mistakes and those lessons, and take the time to want to maybe break down the same thing that they just broke down to you 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. And remind you about it, right? And so if there's anything that I could kind of encourage leaders to really do a gut check on or self-assessment on as you're going through this process, especially if you're going through this process for the first time. And you're typically the person that's like, no, I'll own it. But you're right. In order for me to take that next step in my career and to do right by the folks that I'm developing, more importantly, I have to start empowering and delegating and coaching them up, right? You need to always do a self-assessment around where you at with your patients. Your patience level. Am I giving this person the grace that they need in order to make sure that I'm delivering on the protection component, right? So they can come to me and be vulnerable about what they don't know, and I'm not going to bite their head off or be annoyed at the fact that, hey, I'm having to tell you this thing again, right? Am I giving them the grace that they need so that they feel confident in the parameters that I set? Mm-hmm. Am I giving them the grace and the patience that they need so they really do feel ownership and empowerment, because I'm not trying to step in and just say, hey, let me do it myself. Hey, this got to the point, I'm just going to do it myself. Yeah. Like I'm saying, as many times as you have to come back to me and ask a question and learn about it, I'm here. We'll figure this thing out together, right? The patient component is really, really critical. And when you're doing this for the first time, it's the one that you can most easily slip up in, because either you are measuring somebody, like your team's work product, up against what you would have produced. Like, man, I would have already had this done. Yeah, but you're not the one that's doing the work. Mm-hmm. So why are you doing that comparison, right? Like, you now would have already had it done. Yeah, but what about you at that same point in your career, in your life? Would you have already had it done, or would you have needed the same amount of time that they're taking, right? And so again, you just always have to do that gut check around the patience component, because it's easy to slip up in. It really is.
Yeah, I think part of that patience is realizing that as a leader, I can't set goals for people, right? So I've given them expectations, and I have desires in regards to what I'm hoping that end result is going to be, but I can't set goals for people, and I can't set those type of expectations. Like, these are the expectations on the task. This is what we're expecting for the end result, but kind of how they go about doing that, the level of effort. Again, it's you can't compare what you just said, how I would do something even now, compared to how they're doing it at their point. It's just not the same. So,
no, man, that's like me looking at Linux, and like when Linux is, taking off and running and he's falling, right? And I'm just like, man, I would have never failed. Like, if I was running right now, I wouldn't fall. Like, yeah, but I'm 32. Like, Linux is a year and a half. Like, come on, man. Like, let's be realistic in terms of our expectations, and have some grace. You know what I mean? And just some understanding. Like, you honestly, not only do you do them a disservice by holding them to a false standard, but you also do yourself a disservice as a leader by holding them to a standard that's not realistic, that's not attainable with what they're currently at right now in their development, their leadership walk. And so you end up really agitating yourself for no reason.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, you get pissed off, you're getting pissed off that they're not being able to produce at the level that you're at, without being anchored in the fact that, well, yeah, that's kind of the point. They're not at the level that I'm at right now. And so my job is to close that gap so that one day they can produce that type of product within that time frame. And the way I measure my effectiveness as a leader in terms of development is when I get them to that point.
Yeah.
Like that's less about them. It's less about them and their competency and their skill set, and more about my skill set as a developer, as a teacher, is, do I ever get them to that point? And so, you gotta exercise some patience and not unnecessarily stress yourself out.
Yeah, two things that helped me, and not that you have to go this route, being a father and having my kids, especially at a younger age, definitely helped me with patience. And it was cool as well as I transitioned, from being a team manager to a training team manager, and really starting to teach more on a full-time basis, and learning that you need patience. But to your point, I'm teaching this stuff because I know it. Like, I know the systems, I know the processes, and you have to be patient because, they're new hires. We just brought them into the organization. They're learning this team, they're learning the organization, and they're trying to learn not just maybe new skills, but again, new systems, new processes, the knowledge that they need, and they're not where you're at. So you have to be patient with people to help them walk through that process. And again, it's letting them know that I'm willing to do that. Like, I know that you're going to make mistakes. That's okay. Let's learn from the mistakes, and I'm willing to walk with you and kind of shepherd you through this process.
Absolutely, man. Like, um, I can tell you, for me, transitioning into learning development definitely helped accelerate my my growth and patience for sure. Working with new hires and again, systems and processes that like the back of your hand. These people, people are asking you multiple times the same question around, hey, where do I go and what do I click? And your job is, especially as the first example that they have of what leadership in this organization looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have even more of an obligation to exercise the certain level of patience and coaching and grace and skill set, because you're setting people up for future success, right? And what to expect moving forward. So um, that definitely, like I said, helped out quite a bit, because again, coming from operations and working with seasoned uh, you know agents or seasoned leaders, you almost get accustomed to, oh yeah, it, right? These things, right? And then when you're working with new hires, it's like, oh wait, you don't know nada. And then being able to like I said, exercise the necessary patience, as you're training them up. But so with that, kind of the other thing that I've always tried to hold on to is that I try to always tell myself, when I'm working with a new leader or with somebody on a new skill, it's I need to exemplify the level of patience and grace as a teacher that I would want to receive as a student.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's plenty of times where I've been on the other end and I'm learning something new for the very first time, and so and I think we all can relate to that. Like, when you're learning something for the very first time, like, there's a couple things that go through your head. One, like, you're like, damn, I don't want to be a bother to this person, right? Like, I want to learn as quickly as possible. I hope I'm not inconveniencing them. I hope that they're not making any assessments around my intelligence, how
Mm-hmm.
quickly I pick this stuff up or not, right? Like, I promise you I'm smart, right? And you want to do a good job, and you just feel that innate pressure to make sure that you understand it and that you can conceptualize it and execute on it, right? And so those same thoughts that you go through as a student, the folks that you're developing, the people that you're working with, the people that you're teaching these things to, they're going through those same things. And so if you go into teaching or development with a student's heart, I think that anchors you and allows you to have the necessary patience that you need in order to be an effective teacher. And I think when you do that, you find yourself, over reassuring, the people that you're teaching, even if they don't express it. Like, you're picking up on the body language and the subtle
Mm-hmm.
cues that comes with, oh, I hope I'm not an inconvenience, and hey, I hope they're not annoyed at the fact that I'm asking this again. And you're just able to lean into it and speak to it, and just like, hey, no, you're absolutely fine. No, what do you need? No, that's what I'm here for. If you got to ask me another 2 times, that's fine, right? Like, all of those things that we naturally do to reassure or reaffirm, um, it's because we know, as students, when we're students, we want those things said to us. And so I try to carry that over into my development conversations with my team, with anybody I'm working with. When I get the, hey, I'm sorry I'm asking so many questions, or hey, I know you already showed me this, but, like, before they even finish a sentence, I just think about myself as a student, and what I would want to hear is like, hey, no, you're absolutely fine. That's what I'm here for. My job is to teach this. Like, what do you have a question about? I prefer you reach out to me instead of make assumptions and then be totally off base, right? Like, let's make sure that you got it.
Yeah,
And so the patience is critical.
absolutely. So, for our legacy leaders, there are two promises that we have made as we've embarked on this journey, right? And that's the goal is leaving a legacy for future generations. Well, how do we do that? Well, work and develop to become a leader worth following. Last week we unpacked, 4 aspects that you can focus on to help you grow and truly focus on yourself, so that you can even give more to others, to really continue to grow into being a leader worth following. We've also promised to, as you develop to that point, how do you help other leaders to do the same? Well, we've just given you the 4 ingredients for true empowerment: permission, making sure that they have full ownership; parameters, giving clarity on expectations and boundaries; protection, letting them know that it's okay to make a mistake; and then patience, letting them know that you're willing to go through that journey with them. So we definitely hope that you guys listening have really soaked that in, digest it, and we'd love for you to leave any comments. We want you to be a part of the conversation as well. So if you're listening to this on any number of podcast platforms, make sure that you subscribe and leave some comments for us as well. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, definitely leave some comments there as well. If you have additional questions, again, that's always different spots that you can do that in. But again, join the conversation and just let us know what you think, about these ingredients. Are there any ingredients that maybe we've missed? What does it mean to you to truly help empower an individual and provide empowerment to your team? So, yeah, it's been good, man. Definitely appreciate that. I'm excited, as we look towards next week. I think the first Mentored by Adversity was really powerful, and we're looking to really get that taken care of and get that done for the next episode. So yeah, that's what's on the horizon for us, our second installment of Mentored by Adversity. I'll say it again. We thank you guys for being patient with us. Hopefully that we haven't given you reason to need too much patience. But just riding this journey with us, being willing to watch, to listen, whatever it is that kind of fits your fancy and is best for you. We definitely appreciate you guys, again, doing that for us, doing that with us. Leave reviews if you're listening to this on Apple iTunes, if you're on Spotify, or that's on Podbeam. Again, whatever platform, I'm sure there's an opportunity for you to leave a review, give us some stars, leave an actual written review. We would sincerely appreciate that. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the alert, the little bell as well. That way you're always up to date whenever we're putting out new content, and you're alerted to that. We definitely appreciate that. So again, be on the lookout for the next episode where we'll be going into our interview again and talking with our next guest about how they've grown, how they've been developed as a leader through adversity that they've been through. So once again, my friend, it's been real. I appreciate you, enlightening me and just, talking about some of these things. And you're welcome. When we talked about you becoming a trainer.
Oh yeah, yeah, man. Yeah, that was your doing. I'm better for it. I really am. I've been able to pull on that experience and a litany of roles, and it's got me some street cred too with my support staff. Especially in this new site. When they know I have that learning development background, because I know operations, we have a stigma about us that we are all gas, no brakes, and just results, and we are a burger factory. Even if the task requires steak, and just having that L&D experience has definitely been helpful in terms of keeping me rooted in the right approach and the right perspective, and making sure what the learning journey is for our team as we're tackling some of these things. So yes, thank you, man.
All God's plan, bro. All God's plan. He just worked through me. So again, happy to be there for you as well. So again, permission, parameters, protection, and patience, the 4 ingredients of true empowerment. For our legacy leaders, go out there, start putting these things into practice. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate you soaking it up. But the best way to do it and to really own it is to start doing it and start, applying these lessons, these different tactics, and working on these things so you can truly empower the leaders that are around you.
Absolutely.
So we thank you very much. God bless and stay encouraged, everybody.
Rage on that beat, going crazy.
You have just listened to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, hosted by Jimmy Gonzalez and Devon Watts. Thank you, and we hope that you live, lead, and leave a legacy worth remembering. Until next time.